All right. Let's start getting back to our seats, and Dr. Carter will begin in a couple minutes. Thank you.
Believe the Bible is true?
Has science proven the Bible wrong?
Is creation and evolution a side issue?
Our ancestors understood origins by extrapolating from their own experience. How else could they have done it? Then science came along and taught us that we are not the measure of all
The
things.
simplest explanation is, there is no God. No one created the universe, and no one directs our fate.
You and I are the product of billions
We share a
of
common
years,
ancestor
billions of years.
with chimpanzees.
This animal eventually became human.
I'm sorry, but if you don't understand that humans and monkeys came from a common ancestor...
Single out evolution and act as if there's some kind of major scientific dispute, and in fact...
Evolution is a fact, not a theory.
Evolution is a fact. I mean, that's right. There's no question.
Evolution isn't an opinion, it's fact.
Evolution is scientific fact.
I'm sorry, I believe in evolution.
Lived in the ocean 200 million years ago.
8 million years ago,
We emerged from microbes and muck.
I hope you enjoyed that first session. In the second one, I'm going to change it up a little bit. I know the title was maybe the biblical age of the earth, what does the evidence say, or something like that. The thing is that I had 3 different talks that I could have given that would fit that title. And what I want to give you is my newest one, the one I'm most excited about, because, well, I just wrote a book on biblical genealogy. The title is First Adam to Last Adam, an Introduction to Biblical Genealogy. No, it's not every name in the Bible. It's all the important things about those name lists that no one wants to learn, because no one wants to read all those name lists in First Chronicles, right? But there's some really good stuff in there, amazing things. Now, this is a mock-up of the title. That's not going to be the final title, but my designer came up with this concept of a half-bitten fruit inside a crown of thorns. I thought that's like the coolest thing ever. So, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the age of the earth, because biblical genealogy tells us how old the earth is. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't even know. But I'm going to add a few other things along the way. Problem is, genealogies in the Bible are the great killer of all read through the Bible reading plans. How many of you have gotten to the begats and just gave up? Or maybe you got all the way to like 2nd Chronicles. You're like, I can't do it anymore. Yeah, have you done that? There are really long lists of names in the Bible, and they're really boring to read. But they give us a timeline of Earth's history. They also explain to us the question of races and racism and give us an answer to the racism question. They also give us the lineage of Jesus, which is very interesting. When you learn about some of these genealogies, you learn all sorts of famous example. A woman named Jael, Jael. She drove a tent peg through Sisera's head. You know that story from the Old Testament, right? Maybe. Who was Jael married to? One of the descendants of Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. They were living amongst the Israelites. The Bible says that. And later on in the story, if you don't catch the phrase Kenite, you don't know who that is until you study the genealogies. And when you do that, the stories open up, and there's all these details that we'd forget otherwise or miss. Plus, we have hours of fun struggling to pronounce really odd names. Okay, but if you want to understand biblical genealogy, let me give you the simplest, boil it down to 2 things. There are 2 types of family trees in the Bible. One of them is really hard. One of them is really easy. The hard one is a descendant tree. I am a genealogist. I have spent 40 years of my life, 35 years of my life studying my own family tree. And I have written descendant trees. So if I had a person in my family tree, I read all their descendants. You can't do it. You can't put all the people on the same page because you don't know how many, children this person's going to have. You don't know how much space to give them. That person has 1 child, they might have, 20 grandchildren or something like that. And so descendant trees are ugly, but ancestor trees are easy because you only have a set number of ancestors. 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. And because most biblical genealogy is focused on the male line, it's just a family stick. It's a person, his father, his father, his father, his father, his father. It's easy. So here's a classic descendant tree. The Table of Nations in Genesis 10 and 11. It took me hours to arrange these names on a single page in PowerPoint. It's like pulling your fingernails out, just trying to figure out, I can move this over here and draw these lines. This is hard, but this is Noah. Let me turn on my laser pointer again. Noah, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their sons and grandsons, some great-grandsons, and on and on. And here's Abraham, the father of Isaac, father of Jacob, the father of 12 tribes of Israel. So there's a classic descendant tree, and it's ugly. But there's other ways to graph things like this. Here's another way to see it. Boom, same information. Does that look different? Does that give you a different feel for what you're seeing? Yeah, my first reaction when I did this, I said, oh, this is incomplete. Obviously, we don't have all the names. Obviously. In fact, most of these names are Arabs and Canaanite tribes. These are people that lived in the immediate vicinity of Israel. So yeah, here's Noah, there's Shem, there's Ham, and there's Japheth. And there are 16 named sons. But on the next ring, most of these are not names. They end in ite and im. Im is Hebrew for plural. These are people groups that descended from one of those 16 named sons, grandsons of Noah. So does a people group instantly appear? No, it takes time. There's time gaps here also. In fact, I don't even know when the Table of Nations was written. Was it written right after the Tower of Babel? Because this follows the Tower of Babel in Genesis. Was this written right after the Tower of Babel? Okay, so it's a description of Noah's sons and grandsons, and some of the tribes that rose from those grandsons, mainly in the area of Israel. So maybe some early person, maybe Abraham, who's living in Israel area, He wrote a description of all the people around him soon after Tower of Babel. Okay. But what if it was written later? What if the time gap is there because later on, maybe in Moses' time, they settle in Israel and they describe all the nations that they know? Think about this. How far west does this go? You know Simon of Cyrene in the New Testament who carried Jesus' cross? Cyrene, you remember the Benghazi problems we had 15, 20 years ago? I don't remember what that was. Benghazi. So if you look at Libya, there's this big old hole in the top of Libya. Tripoli is on the west side, and Benghazi is on the east side. This is Cyrenaica, Cyrene. That's as far west as the Bible describes. It doesn't describe the rest of North Africa. It doesn't describe anything below the countries right underneath Egypt. We don't know where the sub-Saharan Africans came from, according to Scripture. The Bible in the Mediterranean only gets as far as the island of Crete. It doesn't even tell us where the Greeks come from, let alone the Latins or the Spanish. Eastwards, it goes as far as western Iran and Elam. It doesn't even get to India. It doesn't even get to Pakistan. It doesn't get to Europe. How many of you have heard, the Europeans are descended from Japheth? Yeah, you don't know that. In fact, Crete was settled by descendants of Ham. And Crete is right next to Greece. And once you're in Greece, you're on Europe. And you just walk up into Europe from there. So what if Europe was settled by descendants of Ham? Okay, side issue. Isn't it true that black people have dark skin because they were cursed by Noah? A lot of people believe that today. A lot of theologians taught that, especially trying to defend American slavery. Yeah, descended from Ham. That's not true, because God didn't curse Ham. Noah didn't curse Ham. Noah cursed Canaan, and Canaan lived in Asia. We call that place today Israel and Palestine. So there's a lot we have to learn about Scripture, and we tend to take shortcuts. The first time you read it, okay, but then when you start digging more and more and more and more, all of a sudden it's not quite as it appeared the first time. So I don't know when the Table of Nations is written. If it's written really early in Earth's history, I don't expect the modern people that are living there to reflect the genetics of that pattern, because thousands of years have happened. Wars, migrations, people groups getting wiped out, people groups merging, people exchanging genes. That happens all the time. Someone comes from one country, maybe there's a sailor, right? And he goes to another country, and what happens when he's in the other port? Probably leave some babies behind. This is what people do. It's what we've always done. So I expect that the pattern of Genesis is going to get scrambled over time. If this is written later, then you've got maybe 1,000 years history happened before. So if maybe Moses wrote this, I wouldn't expect this to reflect the immediate situation right after the Tower of Babel. Here's another descendant tree. There's Terah, the father of Abraham, the father of Isaac, father of Jacob, father of Joseph, Benjamin, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and the rest of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, this is not in one place in the Bible. This is hunting and pecking through a lot of different things to put this family tree together. In blue, these are all the people that contributed genetics to the 12 tribes. Here's a weird thing, though. Abraham married a sister. Different mothers, same father. So when they had Isaac, genetically, it was like giving birth to their own brother. Ew. Isaac then married Rebekah, who was his first cousin, once removed, first cousin twice removed, times 2, Rebekah, who's much closer than a cousin. It's like marrying a sister. They had Jacob, who's very much inbred by this point, and he marries his first cousin Rachel and his first cousin Leah, who are much closer than cousins because Jacob and Rachel and Leah all descend from Terah on these two lines a couple of times, and Jacob descends from Terah on these two lines. So it's like marrying his sisters. Do you know how You inherit 50% of each of your parents' DNA. You know that, right? You're half mom, half dad. Well, that means you're 25% of your grandparents, 12.5% of each one of your 8 great-grandparents, then 6 1/4, 3. By the time you go from Terra along the longest line here, by the time you get down to these boys, they should maybe be about 3% Terra. But because he inherited his DNA under all these lineages, they're about 22% Terra. Yuck. And according to the laws of genetics, a lot of those genetic things that they inherited, all brothers would have identical copies of one gene only. So if that affected their height or their weight or the curliness of their hair, the shape of the nose, the color of the skin, the color of the eyes, they're going to look different. You could literally be walking down the street of some ancient village and go, oh, there's an Israelite. Because they're going to look different than everybody else because of this level of inbreeding. I wrote an article in a Journal of Creation, it's now online. Inbreeding and the origin of races. We don't need evolution. We don't need millions of years. We need the information for the way we look to be in Adam and Eve, and that's trivial. Literally trivial. And then all we have to do is have the population get subdivided at Babel. Then each little population is going to be inbreeding only within themselves. And when that happens, they lose genetic diversity, and some genes become much more common and some genes disappear. And so you get fluctuations in skin color, hair color, shape, weight, height. All those genes that affect the way people look are going to become very homogeneous in one population. That's a recipe for where the so-called races came from, and it's right there. Perfect recipe. So those are descendant trees. Here's a couple of ancestor trees. Have you ever read the genealogy of Cain in Genesis chapter 4? It's a family stick. And then it ends with 3 sons, Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain. Interestingly, Genesis 5 is also a family stick. It goes from Adam through Seth all the way to Noah, and it ends in 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Interestingly, Genesis 11 is a family stick. It goes from Noah all the way to Terah and ends with 3 sons, Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Why do we have all these family sticks that end with 3 sons? I don't know, but that's really interesting. And why is Cain's line in the Bible? It's because someone thought it was important. But this is not Cain's line. This is Lamech's line, going backwards, because Cain wouldn't have known Lamech. Adam would not have known Noah. And Adam would not have been able to say, okay, I'm going to make this family line. It's going to go to this guy who's going to be born there a couple generations after I get to the end. No. This is Noah looking backwards. When we find a descendant tree, an ancestor tree like this, it's the last person going backwards, tracing their own lineage. And so for some reason, Lamech's line is traced backwards, and Noah's line is traced backwards. Now, a lot of people say that, Cain was evil, and all these are evil people. These are evil people also. When God came down, he only found Noah to be righteous. Well, Lamech and Methuselah were alive at that time. Oh. Not only that, I see El here. There's an L there. The name of God is in the descendants of Cain's names. Oh. And I just wonder, just speculating, maybe this daughter who is named here was Noah's wife. And this is her family tree. Oh, but you can't, the sons of Cain can't marry the daughters of Seth and vice versa. Who says that? The Bible doesn't put any prescription on that at all. So I'm just wondering. I don't know, but it's a cool idea that maybe that Cain lineage is in there because it's tracing down to an important person at the bottom end. And that's strange that woman, Naamah, appears there. Weird. But this is the nature of genealogies. They're weird, they're hard to understand, and there's no set answers. And that's just the way it is. But you can take this information and use it to build a timeline of Earth's history. Specifically, we know that Adam is 130 years old when Seth is born, and so on and so on and so on. We have the ages of all these men when their son is born. Little bit of ambiguity between Noah and Shem, but we know Arphaxad was born 2 years after the flood, and we know how old Noah was when the flood started. He's 600. Okay, but is that 2 years after the end of the flood, or 2 years from the start of the flood? Is it 2 seasons? Is it 48 or 24 months? I don't know, but it's 2 years after the flood. We have Arphaxad, and Arphaxad goes all the way down to Terah. And from Terah, go to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and we know when Jacob goes, how old he is when he goes into Egypt. So if we can know when they went into Egypt, we can calculate how old the earth is. Oh. But we run into problems with Bible versions. Now in blue is on top of the gray and it's on top of the red. The others it's overlapping. But in blue, those are the numbers you get when you read your English translated Bibles. This is the Masoretic Hebrew text becomes that. And we learn that Joseph was born around 2,300 years after creation. So AC or AM, Anno Mundi, the age of the earth. But after creation, about 2,300-ish. Now in gray, those are the dates you get if you use the Greek Septuagint Bible. Now, after lots of study, and honestly, it was years of study. I have one Journal of Creation article and 5 really long articles on creation.com on the question of the Septuagint. Is that the original or is the blue the original? And there's debate within us. Different creationists are debating about this, but I tell you what, even though I was willing to be persuaded, the more I studied, the more I fell onto the side of the Masoretic. All the arguments for the Septuagint failed. If you just go on creation.com, type in LXX or Carter LXX or Septuagint, you'll start seeing my articles there. It was an awful lot of work. I just don't believe it. The problem is I want it to be true because then I have more time. If I have more time, I can more easily explain archaeology. I don't have the time. So be it. Archaeology is hard, but there you have it. We have this issue of Bible translations or Bible versions. In red, that's the Samaritan Pentateuch. You know, the Good Samaritan, the woman at the well, Jesus going through Samaria. Well, the Samaritans have their own version of the Bible, which they changed. Everybody knows they changed it. The temple's not in Jerusalem. The temple's on Mount Samaria. And the other things they harmonized, Genesis 5, Genesis 11. We know they changed it, but if you use their dates, it's very Masoretic-like in Genesis 5, but it's very Septuagint-like in Genesis 11. And so you have a different stream of numbers there. But that's putting that out there for you. You can study this on your own. That's how you start from Adam and get to places where the genealogy peters out. Here's our basic timeline. So we want to build a timeline, right? We can only go from creation forward to about Joseph-ish. We actually have to go backwards. We want to answer the question, how old is the earth according to the Bible? We have to start with something we know, a peg we can hang biblical history on, and then we know where it ends. But where do we start? What year was Jesus born? I don't know. Different people have different ideas. I have an idea, but I don't even think is the majority view among scholars. It's 3 or 4 BC, 6 BC, 2, I don't know, it's somewhere in there. So that's not a very happy date. The problem with that is you can't use the birth of Christ going backwards, mainly because before that we don't have really good history. We have what scholars call the 400 silent years. This is where no books of the Bible are being written, no prophecies are happening during these 400 years. We have Maccabees. We have the Apocrypha. But Maccabees isn't really good history. There's issues with it. It's not like Luke. Luke is amazing history. Maccabees, there's problems. So I don't trust it. What we need is a date that everyone agrees with, and that date is 586 BC, the year the Babylonians destroyed the temple. Maybe 587. Let's go with 586, the year the Babylonians destroyed the temple, because this is attested to in detail in the Bible and in the Babylonian records. And archaeologists and historians are able to say, okay, we know that this is this year, Nebuchadnezzar, boom, is 586 BC. I don't know people that argue about that. Other things they argue about a lot, but not that. So That could be our starting point. We can start there. Problem is, before this, you have what's called the divided monarchy. You have the period where you had King Saul, King David, King Solomon, and in Solomon's son Rehoboam, there was a civil war. And Israel divided into the northern nation of Israel and the southern nation of Judah. And you had kings of both of them. You've read through Kings, right? So-and-so was this old when he died, and it was in the fourth reign of this other king. If you've ever tried to build a chronology out of that, you've probably failed. You can get close, but there are questions about, there are some times when a son and father are reigning together. It's not specified, you have to figure it out. There's also issues of how to count year zero. I mean, the first year of the king, is that from when he starts, or is that after his first year? Just like when a baby is first born, they're not a year old, right? Doesn't Korea have yeah, okay. Kinda. They changed it recently, didn't they? Okay. But I think in the old system, forgive me, the old system, when you're born, that's your first year. And then at New Year's, that's when your next year starts, because you could literally be 2 days old and be 2 years old. Why not? It's a fair way to do it. Well, it looks like the two different kingdoms were actually advancing their years at the two different New Year's in the Hebrew calendar. Because there's Passover in the spring, and there's the New Year in the fall. They got two different New Year's, and it looks like they were doing it different. They might have actually had a year zero, year one difference. But when you figure all that out, scholars have wrestled with this, and they figure out that Solomon built the temple in 966 BC. Now, the further back we go, the more we're uncertain about the numbers. It might not be exactly 966, but it's somewhere really close to that. Now we would like to go further back. What's before the temple? Well, you have the period of the Judges. Problem is, the period of the Judges is really hard, because first, there are things that happen later on in Judges where a name is named of someone at the beginning of Judges. Judges can't be perfectly chronological. Also, when you add up all the length of reigns of all the judges, it's too long. So they had to be maybe a guy in the north and the guy in the south, and they kind of overlapped a little bit. It has to be true. So Judges is a problem, but we can skip over it. Completely skip it over. Because in 1 Kings 6:1, it says, in the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the second month, he began to build the house of the Lord. 966 BC. Boom. 480 years earlier is the Exodus. All the chronological problems are solved in that one verse. It's beautiful. So we have an Exodus now in 1446 BC. You tracking with me? Is this fun? Or am I pulling out your fingernails? Okay. So we had Exodus in 1446 BC. Before this, we have a period called the Sojourn, the time the Israelites in the land of Egypt. Plus the 40 years of wandering after that, that's the wandering years. The Sojourn, the time in Egypt. And we instantly have another major scholarly dispute. Because Exodus chapter 12 says, the time the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. We're done. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the house of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. Now, when I wrote an article on Journal Creations, now on creation.com, the biblical minimum and maximum age of the earth. I didn't want to know the exact day. I want to ask, in fact, my co-author was an engineer, so we're turning this to engineering. We got a set of numbers. How much variability do we have? How much leeway do we have? What could be the shortest possible age of the earth? What could be the longest possible age of the earth according to the Bible? It's a fascinating question. And when I wrote this article, I knew some people thought that the sojourn was only 215 years. But I didn't believe it, because this right here, Exodus 12, 430 years. Why do some people say 215? Yeah, have you heard of Archbishop Usher, who calculated the age of the earth in 1600, 4004 BC? That's when creation was. In order to get that, he needed that Israelites to be in Israel only, in Egypt only 215 years. He used a short sojourn. When I realized that, I said, what? One of the greatest biblical scholars ever didn't take this 430 number? Well, My first crack happened when I'm studying the genealogies of Scripture. Now, this might not be perfect, but this is all the genealogies I found that went through the time in Egypt, the sojourn. So we have people born in Canaan, people who were born or at least lived in Egypt, and people who came out during the Exodus, and people who lived in Israel. And I'm looking at all these family trees, and I'm seeing that they cross, and there are intermarriages amongst people. And I realized that if they were skipping names, because this is not enough generations to go through 430 years. If they were skipping names, you wouldn't be able to link the names together. You could not build a family tree. I would expect a problem somewhere, a contradiction or an ambiguity. And there are 0 contradictions and 0 ambiguities. I said, how do you span 430 years? By the way, article, how long were the Israelites in Egypt? Using their genealogies. So I did this. I did a timeline. Here's my 430-year span. Is 1446 BC. They would have gotten into Egypt in 1876. But we know Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were born before they got to Egypt. We know how old Jacob was when he got to Egypt. The numbers are there. You can pull them out of the text. You can figure out how old Joseph was when he got to Egypt and how long he lived in Egypt. We know how old Levi was when he died, and we know he's older than Joseph. We know that Levi's son Kohath was born before they got to Egypt. The problem is Kohath's son Amram is Moses' father. And you can't even, look, I stretch these out. He's born the year they got there. He's born the year his father died. We know Moses lived 120, and we know he's 80 at the Exodus, so I lined it up there. There's a gap. You can't span 430 years. Worse, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, their mother is Jochebed, the daughter of Levi. But can't daughter mean descendant of? Can't son mean descendant of? Yes, it can. And there's clear places in Scripture where it says son of or daughter of, and it's clearly talking about a descendant. Fine. Maybe that's true. Maybe there are missing generations here. But in a short sojourn, everything lines up beautifully. In fact, you can wiggle Amram, Kohath, and Jochebed left and right and still have room. There are, again, 0 ambiguities, 0 uncertainties, no contradictions, and it fits in the timeline in just a beautiful way. So I will let you decide what you want to believe on this. Go to my article here. There's more other articles on the length of the sojourn. And one of the reasons that we had to do this is because we're studying Egypt intently. In fact, I've been to Egypt now 3 times. Twice. First time we did 3 tours. Second time we did 1 tour. And we're going back this February and March for 2 more tours. I've done this country multiple times. And we're trying to give a biblical tour of Egypt. Biblical answers to the Exodus and things like that. And you need to know this to know that, because you need to be able to identify Joseph's Pharaoh and why a Pharaoh rose that did not know Joseph. Creation.com, type in Egypt. So we have a sojourn. If you take a short sojourn, you get 1661 BC when they went into Egypt. Now, I don't like this. I want the long sojourn. I just lost 200 years of history, which makes the archaeology that much harder. But you know what? Tough. I'm going to take the most conservative position I can. If I turn out to be wrong, I can relax. I have a little more time. If I'm wrong about the Masoretic and Septuagint, the numbers, I get 800 extra years after the flood to explain like Mesopotamian archaeology. Woohoo! That makes my life so easy. I just don't believe it. Okay. So 1661, they go into Egypt, and then we want to get to creation. How do we do that? Well, we take the numbers in Genesis 11. This is called the patriarchal era. And we get a flood date of about 2349 BC. And if we take the number data in Genesis 5, it's called the antediluvian, before antediluvian, the flood. The antediluvian era, we get a creation date of about 4004 BC. And that's how Archbishop Usher did that, assuming a short sojourn. The problem is he was wrong. It's not 4004 BC. It can't be. Or we say it this way, the probability is highly uncertain or highly unlikely, because Usher believed, like a lot of people did up through the medieval period, that Earth's history was going to unfold in 7 1,000-year periods. And since he believed that Jesus was born in 4 BC, the creation was going to be in 4004 BC. So his eschatology was influencing his historicity. That's really interesting. But one reason why I don't believe it's 4004 is because of this. Adam is 130 years old when Seth is born. Was Seth born on Adam's birthday? Probably not. He's born sometime in this year, which as an average is going to be about 6 months after the father's birthday. So every one of those generations on average is going to add 6 months. By the time you get to Abraham, there's 20 generations from Adam. You should add about 10 years to the history of the earth. Oh. There's also questions about calendars. What calendar did Adam use? Did God tell Adam about how long a day was to the millisecond? Did God tell Adam that a year was 365.25 and a little bit more for leap years, days long? I don't think so. So Adam wakes up in the garden. What does he see? He sees the sun. The sun sets. It's dark. Hey, the sun came back again. Oh, well, God calls a light and a dark, or dark and a light period, a day. So Adam knew what a day was. But then there's the moon. The moon's this weird thing. It's disappearing. And then it reappears again, and it gets bigger again. Hey, you know what? I'm going to call that a month. That was what a month is. A month is a month. It's a cycle of the moon. How long would it have taken Adam to realize that 12 lunar months is 11 days short of a calendar year? How long would it have taken Adam to realize the progression of the precession of the equinoxes? It was what, a 32,000-year cycle or something like that? Who knows? It would have taken him a long time. And I think that the first obvious calendar to use is a lunar calendar. It's the only obvious clock that gives you something longer than a day. The year is not obvious. And in fact, calendars are not important to people that live in the tropics. They're important to people that live in temperate regions who are trying to farm. You need to know when the last frost is going to happen so you know when to plant. You need to know when the first frost is going to happen so you know when to harvest. If you miss, you die. That's why calendars are important. Well, important now because of modern commerce. We need to do everything down to the millisecond. But point is, if you're a farming society, which most people in history were, in the temperate regions, that's why you need a calendar. But if you use the lunar cycle, you're off, which is why. You ever wonder why Ramadan is different times of the year? It's an annual feast. I remember when it was in the fall. Now it's in the spring. In fact, last time we went to Egypt, it was during Ramadan. I got in a hot air balloon flying over the Valley of the Kings and Hatshepsut's temple. Beautiful. And there was no cars on the road because it was Ramadan. Hey, by the way, we still have a few slots left open. Creation.com. Come with us to Egypt. Boom. Okay. Point is, Ramadan moves by 10 or 11 days every year because Islam uses a strictly lunar calendar. Muhammad demanded, you're going to use a lunar calendar. Boom. So their year does this throughout the solar year. Well, I don't know what calendar Adam was using. If he was using a lunar calendar, well, maybe it's less than 4004 BC. I don't know. Or how about this? 60 months, lunar months, is almost 5 years. And we know that famous civilizations like Sumer specifically use 60 as their base number. Now, it's a brilliant number because you can divide 60 by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. It's a great system for fractions. But what if they got that concept of 60 from Adam or some pre-flood thing? What if they're counting months in groups of 60? Well, then when whoever took that and translated it into years, if you realize it's groups of 60 months, you divide by 5, all of your years are going to end in a 5 or a 0. It'll be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Almost every one of the numbers in Genesis 5 ends in a 5 or a 0. how old he was when his son was born, how many years he had left, and what the total number of years was. There's 1, 2. Almost all of them end in a 5. And after the flood, there's more 5s and zeros. There's a couple of other numbers too, but most of them are still 5s and zeros. Weird. Why is this? Because something mathematical was happening before the flood that we don't know. Or even consider the Sumerian king list, which I just downloaded and typed up last week in a big spreadsheet trying to figure things out. When you realize that the earliest kings, this guy reigned for 25,000 years, this guy reigned for 72,000 years, whatever the numbers are. Not true, by the way. But all of those numbers are divisible by 60. I'm wondering if Genesis and the Sumerian king list had the same root document that had numbers in it that were months, and Genesis correctly accounted for those months, which has everything in a 5 or 0, dividing by 60, and the Sumerians didn't know that, and they just took the numbers and called it years. But the years are really months. Don't know, I'm just throwing that out there for fun. But if you take all this crazy information, here's your timeline of Earth's history. And the nice thing about this is everything rounds off to nice round numbers. We have the creation about 4,000 BC. I'm just going to take that as an about. It's probably a couple hundred years older than that, but it's about 4,000 BC. The flood's about 1,600 years later, but Abraham lived around 2,000 BC. Moses lived around 500 BC. King David, his lifespan spanned the year 1000 BC. These are nice round numbers that makes it easy to conceive of it, so when we learn something else in ancient history, we can put it in biblical context. Of course, today we're about, Jesus is about 0, and today we're about 2000. So, have you ever heard of the Bronze Age? When was that? How long did it last? Age. It sounds like a long time, right? What about the Copper Age? What about the Iron Age? What about the Battle of Troy? What about the famous 300 Spartans holding back the massive Syrian army? I mean, when did these things happen? Well, the Bronze Age was Moses, and it only lasted a couple of hundred years. In fact, some places skipped the Bronze Age entirely. Just like Africa, they skipped telephones. They went straight to cell phones. They had a giant, tremendous technological leap. They didn't have to put cables all over these telephone poles over the whole continent so everyone can have a wired landline like I grew up with. No, they went straight to cell phones. Boom. We have places that skipped the Bronze Age and other places. David lived in the Iron Age. In fact, he lived in Iron Age 2B, to be specific. These are not vast periods of time. They're just an indication of cultural development, specifically in the area of Israel called the Levant, the Eastern Mediterranean region. They don't necessarily apply to other places. The Battle of Troy happened during the period of the Judges. Oh, Troy was so long ago. No, not really. 1000 BC, 1100 BC. The Peloponnesian Wars between Greece and Sparta, the time of the divided monarchy. That king that tried to invade Greece and the 300 Spartans, that they stopped them, that was Esther's king. After Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, in what year? 586 BC, after that. Oh man, so ancient history really isn't that ancient, and it fits beautifully into a biblical timeline. History, when we have a date, the problem is the earliest stuff is generally wrapped up in mystical statements, like the legendary 5 kings of ancient China. But the first Chinese dynasty is founded after the Tower of Babel on the timeline. Or when you look at Egyptian history, we have a big problem in that the pyramids, the secular date is before the flood. The pyramids could not survive the flood. They could not. Plus, they're built out of flood-deposited limestones. So they have to be after the flood, but the biblical flood, well, the problem in Egyptian history is, one, we know that everything we see in Egypt is a political statement. We know that people were stealing stories from their grandfather and claiming it for themselves. The Egyptians never lost a battle. Yes, we know they lost battles. They never said they lost a battle. It's all politics. And we've lists of kings that people have stuck end to end, even though now we know a lot of them were contemporaneous. This is the kings of one city, the kings of another, and they're fighting each other. Oh, so Egyptian history collapses, and there's actually three, but two earlier ones. They're called intermediate periods that are really hard to date. In fact, the middle kingdom between the two intermediate periods is really mushy. There's not really good dating scheme for that. So I really think Egyptian history does this, whoop, which puts the pyramids after the flood. Just putting that out there. Creation.com/Egypt, you'll find tons of stuff. If you want more scientific evidence for the age of the earth, which is what I think some of you came here expecting, go to creation.com, type in age of the earth. Here's Don Byton's article, 101 Evidences for a Young Age of the Earth and the Universe. There's a lot of, in fact, most clocks point to the earth being really young. Most of them. Okay? If you want biblical answers to the age of the earth, look at my article, The Biblical Minimum Maximum Age of the Earth. That's a 1-2 punch right there, which will help you at least accept the biblical claim. Now, I know it's uncomfortable. If you want to believe this, people are going to laugh at you. Hey, Christian, do you believe that Jesus did not have an earthly father? Do you believe that he said, I'm going to die and rise from the grave, and then he did? And he was really dead and then rose from the dead? They're already laughing at you. Compromising on this doesn't actually help. It gets you nowhere. They will still laugh at you. So, let's be brave here. Let's read and study and accept what is stated. All right, you okay so far? Okay, I'm going to shift gears here. That's my spiel about the age of the earth, and I think it's really fun. I love data like that. I'm a nerd. I like this stuff. But let's get really nerdy here. Let's look back at the genealogies again, and let's crack, or try to crack, a terrific problem. Something that Richard Dawkins used in his book, The God Delusion, to say that the Bible is full of nonsense and cannot be true. This is a giant contradiction. Something, if you go to talk.origins, there's an entire page dedicated to this that supposedly proves that the Bible is not true, and that is the fact that Jesus has two different genealogies, one in Luke and one in Matthew. You can't have two different fathers. Something is wrong. Now, have you heard Jesus has two different genealogies? What's the answer you hear all the time? One's the mother, one's the father. Specifically that Matthew is tracing Joseph's line and Luke is tracing Mary's line. That's very common today. That's not the most common view in Christian history. In fact, go to creation.com, type in lineage of Christ, and you'll find this chart. We have Luke goes backwards. He starts at Joseph, goes all the way back to Adam. Matthew starts at Abraham and goes forward to Joseph, father of Jesus. But if you skip over here, here's Adam, going all to Abraham. Here's where the two lineages are the same. Then we have King David, who has a bunch of sons. Well, his son Solomon, here in blue, is the king. His brother Nathan was not the king. But Solomon's line goes through in Matthew all the way here to a guy named Jeconiah, who's son of Shealtiel, who's son of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel? Yeah, he was the first governor of Judah when they came out of Babylon. Very important figure. And then we have some other names, and it's Joseph, the adoptive father of Christ. And then in Luke, it goes from David to Nathan, a whole bunch more names. And then it ends in Shealtiel, father of Zerubbabel. Oh, we got another problem. This can't be true. Genealogies of father-to-son relationships don't merge and split. And then it ends up with maybe Mary. I don't believe that, but that's a very common view. One issue we have here is we know that Matthew skipped a couple of names. Jeconiah's father is not listed, and there's three guys over here who are not listed in Matthew. So we know he's skipping over known names that he knew. We cannot, and there's hypotheses why, but no one knows exactly why. So in the lineage from Zerubbabel to Joseph, this might be shorter because maybe he's skipping over names. Well, Matthew specifically has 3 sets of 14 names. In numerology, David, skipping because there's no vowels here, D is the 4th letter of the alphabet, V is the 6th letter, and D is the 4th. 4 plus 4 plus 6 is 14. So we've got 3 sets of 14. Very schematic. Very interesting. So he might be skipping over something. This is the only example in all of Scripture where I know that generations are being skipped. I don't believe they're being skipped in Genesis 5 and 11 because mathematically it doesn't work out. And I showed you in the sojourn how if you have a short sojourn, then no generations are being skipped. This is definitely one of them. But if we want to crack this nut that Richard Dawkins says disproves the Bible, we got to look at this guy right here, Jeconiah. Have you ever read in Kings or Chronicles about the end of the kingdom of Judah? Have you ever been really confused? There are 4 kings in a row. 2 of them reign for 3 months. All these 4 kings have at least 2 names. Ugh. Well, here's how it works. We have Josiah, the last good king, the boy king. He has a bunch of sons. One named Johanan, which we never hear of again. The first king after him is Shallum, also known as Jehoahaz, who is not his oldest son, but he is deposed. Basically, here's what happens. The Egyptians are marching through Israel to help Assyria in their fight with Babylon. I think this is the Battle of Carchemish. Mike got that wrong. I think it's Carchemish. And the Babylonians win, and that's why Assyria disappears, why Babylon becomes a big kingdom that 100 years later or so, they're going to destroy Jerusalem. But the Egyptian pharaoh, who's also a named pharaoh, Necho, and Necho is known from Egyptian history, and we know when he lived. It's a place where the Bible ties into secular history without any contradictions. But the Egyptian pharaoh is marching through. Josiah comes down to meet him, and the Egyptian pharaoh straight away just kills him. We don't know if there's a battle. We don't know. He just kills him. Boom. And then Shallum is king, and the Egyptians say, no, as they're coming back after losing the battle, they depose him, bring him to Egypt where he dies, and appoint another one of Josiah's sons, Eliakim, whose name is also Jehoiakim. It's just so confusing. Hey, one of the interesting things about Hebrew names is that the letters are each a word. It might be like, God is great. But if you switch the words around, you get great as God. It's the same name. And so a lot of these names are just the letters reversed. Oh, that helps a little bit, because I'm not explaining which letters. But we have this guy named Eliakim, or Jehoiakim. He has a son named Jehoiachin. Now, Eliakim reigns for 11 years. Jehoiachin, or Jeconiah, or Coniah, that's Jeconiah without Yahweh as Coniah. Why is it going to be so hard? He reigns for 3 months. The Babylonians come, they imprison him in Babylon, actually for 37 years, not 35. He's 55 years old when he gets out of prison. He's the last surviving king of Judah. Because his uncle, Mattaniah, or Zedekiah, then becomes the king. He reigns for 11 years. He rebels against Babylon. They come back. They bring him out. They kill all of his children in front of him and then blind him. So the last thing he sees is the death of his children, and that he dies in Babylon. But Jeconiah didn't die. He lived a long time and then got out of prison. Except Jeconiah. Listen to what Jeremiah says about him. As I live, declares the Lord, though Coniah, same name, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, or the signet ring on my right hand, yet I would tear you off and give you into the hand of those who seek your life, into the hands of those who you are afraid, even to the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, into the hand of the Chaldeans. That's interesting, because Zerubbabel, it said he is like a signet on God's right hand. Oh, that's cool. But Jeconiah, were you a signet, I would tear you off. Jeremiah again. I will hurl you and the mother who bore you into another country where you were not born, and there you shall die. But to land to which they long to return, they shall not return. And in Jeremiah 22, write this man, Jeconiah, write this man down as childless, a man who shall not succeed in his days, for none of his offspring shall succeed in sitting on the throne of David and ruling again in Judah. This is why people say the Messiah cannot come from Jeconiah. Because if your offspring aren't going to succeed in sitting on the throne, Messiah is the king of Judah. So how can he not be Jesus' ancestor and yet be listed in Matthew? Well, he could have repented. There are other places in Scripture where God pronounces judgment on people, and they repent, and God relents his judgment. And later on in Jeremiah, he basically says, in my English, hey, y'all, I just want you to come back. That's what God says to the Israelites. But they don't, and he destroys them. And Jewish literature says he repented. Might be true, might not be true. The Bible doesn't say it. But he was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to the city and took him prisoner. In the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim / Jeconiah / Coniah, king of Judah, in the 12th month, in the 27th day of the month, Evil-Merodach, Nebuchadnezzar's son, king of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign, graciously freed Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat above the seats of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin put off his prison garments, and every day of his life he dined regularly at the king's table, and for his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king according to his daily needs as long as he lived. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I bet. Yeah, some petty little Judahite king got restored. Isn't that a nice morality tale? Say the liberals. Except in the ruins of, I think, Susa, I could be wrong about the location, but in the ruins of one of these ancient Mesopotamian cities, we have found the ration tablet that specifies how much food the man Jeconiah is going to be given every day, and it names his sons and how much they're going to be given. I think he was given 10 liters of oil or 10 whatever equivalent of oil a day. You can't use that much oil. It's money. You can spend it. You can trade it. And his sons, I think, were given a half. That's really cool. I love it when archaeology confirms a little teeny detail in Scripture. And that has happened thousands of times. Archaeology in no way contradicts Scripture. And it keeps on building up more. And in fact, it's the little things that get supported that's more important than if a big thing got supported. It makes it really important, and the Bible simply is historically accurate. I mean, there's the record of it right there. Let's look at now in 2 Kings. This is Isaiah, not Jeremiah, but Isaiah, who lived 150 years before Isaiah, talking to another one of the good kings, Hezekiah. Hezekiah is a famous king. He survived the Assyrian attempted conquest, and he built Hezekiah's tunnel, and on it, he was a good king. Hear the word of the Lord, Isaiah says to Hezekiah. Behold, the days are coming when all that's in your house and all that your fathers have stored up to this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. And some of your own sons who come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. That didn't happen. The Babylonians did not do this during the time of his own sons. Clearly here, sons means descendant. Okay? Clearly, because this did happen. This happened in his great-grandson's time, or great-great, something like that, in Josiah's grandson's time. But the eunuchs, does that mean that Jeconiah was turned into a eunuch? That happened all the time. Kings did that to each other. Well, in which case, he had no children of his own. Let this man be counted as childless. He had no children of his own. Okay? Or it didn't happen, and he did have children. I don't know, but I suspect that this did happen to another famous person in the Bible, Daniel, who was of the royal household. And this is what kings did to people of the royal house. Take those princes and whoosh, now you're a eunuch, and now you can live, basically you're safe around the harem because you can't do anything. But they also tend to be scholars. And I suspect Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were also in that same position. I don't know that's true, but it's likely. And I don't know if it happened to Jeconiah either. But you following with me so far? Are you done with names? Your brains are full? Oh, they better not be, because I got some more names for you. Okay. Here is the lineage of Matthew compared to the lineage of Luke. We have King David, Solomon, all the way to Jeconiah. There's the 4 names that Matthew skips over. On the right is Luke's list from David through Nathan. By the way, the sons of Nathan are mentioned during the Babylonian captivity. We know they were still around, but were it not for Luke, we would not have any of their names. Oh, that's cool. But they converge in Shealtiel, the father of Zerubbabel. And then they continue on. Here's Shealtiel and Zerubbabel. We have Matthew's list going through these names that are not anywhere else in the Bible. And we have Luke's list going through these names that are not anywhere else in the Bible. In other words, Matthew and Luke both went to the records. They went to the temple. That means that both of these things had to be done before AD 70 when the tablets, where all the records were destroyed by the Romans. So here we have two different lists, and they all go down to Joseph, adoptive father of Jesus. But it's worse, because 1 Chronicles 3 has another name, Pedaiah, the son of Jeconiah and the father of Zerubbabel. Oh, who's Pedaiah? Come on. Can't this genealogy be easy? No, it's not easy. Well, maybe Shealtiel had two names. Fine, that might be true. A lot of people in the Old Testament have two names. But let's do something really hard. Let's assume all these people are real. I spent years thinking about this and a month intentionally thinking about this. I remember I was in a shower. I was like, oh, what? No way. So I got on some clothes, ran across my house, and I'm still dripping wet, and I had this piece of paper, and I started drawing family trees, and no. I did this. I don't know if this is true, but it is a solution. There are maybe other solutions. I just can't think of one. I was looking for something that was probable, that wasn't conflicting, and that followed the Old Testament law. And something that I figured would have happened a lot normally. So here, Jeconiah. He's 55 years old when he gets out of prison. We don't know if he had any sons beforehand. We don't have any conjugal visits during, but he's 55 years when he gets out of prison. I'm figuring that he doesn't have any kids yet. What's the last surviving king going to do when he gets out of prison? He's going to try to have a son. Yeah, he's going to try to keep the kingly line going. And kings are also very polygamous. I suspect he probably married a lot of different women. Well, let's say he had a wife, and they had a son named Pedaiah. And let's say because he's the king, he do what he wants, he married a widow of a descendant of Nathan. She's probably his cousin. She's probably a princess herself, because the kingly people, they would have kept on marrying within the kingly line. I suspect Solomon and Nathan, I bet they exchanged women in their two lines a lot. That's what they would have done, normally. Let's say that the wife and Neri already had a Shealtiel. And when Jeconiah marries the wife, he becomes an adoptive son of Jeconiah. What would happen if Pedaiah died before Jeconiah and Pedaiah had no son? What would this brother have to do according to the law? He would have to marry the widow. I know that sounds gross. Ladies, I know that's uncomfortable. But consider, this actually is a blessing to the woman, because she's not thrown out onto the street. Even though she has no son and no way to support herself, the only way for a woman to support themselves with no child is what? Beggary or prostitution. But here, the other brother is not allowed to usurp the money, the land, whatever, of that dead son. The woman, when she has a son, is now taken care of. Just putting that out there for you. But if Shealtiel did that, here we have a Zerubbabel, only the technical son of Pedaiah, the legal heir of Pedaiah, but not a blood descendant of Jeconiah. Do I know it's true? No, but it does work. And now we have the blue line is a line of Matthew, because Matthew is not a genealogy. Matthew's tracing the rightful descendant of David, the king. And a king list is not a genealogy. For example, Queen Elizabeth I. She lived a long time. When she died, who became the next king? She had no children. It was King James of Scotland. They were both descended from Henry VII, but he was a couple more generations down because she was really old when she died. He was her first cousin twice removed. We skipped some generations there. And if you were reading English history and you didn't know that, you maybe thought that James was Elizabeth's son. He's not. Let's look at the next Elizabeth, Elizabeth II, who just died a couple years ago. She was not supposed to be the queen. The current king of England is not supposed to be the king of England because Elizabeth's uncle was king and he wanted to marry a divorced American woman. And England said, you can't do that. He said, fine, I quit. Let my brother be the king. And that's how Elizabeth got into succession. And if you didn't know that, and you're just reading a list of, it was like Edward and George, I don't remember who's who, I forget. But you're just Edward II, George III, or whatever it is, and you wouldn't know there's a brother. If you look at English history, half of the time from William the Conqueror to today, the next king or queen is not the child of the last king or queen. Half the time. In Matthew, we might not be talking about father to son relationships, because anytime any of these men died with no son, they would have jumped to the other lineage, and the older brother would have become the heir. The younger brother would have been in Luke's line, except in one place where you have a man named Mathan and Mathot. The grandfather of Joseph in one is Mathan in Matthew, I think, and Mathot in Luke. That's the same name. If you're translating from Aramaic into Greek, it's the same name. They had the same names of grandfather in two different lines. What if it's the same guy? What if Eliezer had no sons? And either we went way up the family tree or maybe just pulled an older brother, who knows? And all of a sudden, Mathan is the heir and a descendant of Nathan. And then Jacob maybe had no sons. And maybe his brother Heli was already dead, so Joseph becomes the king of the Jews. Speculative, sure, but sure is fun to talk about. You know what this means, though? That means that when Pilate asked Jesus that one question, are you the king of the Jews? He was the rightful heir of David, and the Messiah has to be a descendant of David. Not only that, interestingly, Joseph has to die before the crucifixion. Because if he was alive, he would be the rightful heir of David. But by dying first, Jesus now actually is literally the king of the Jews. Thus it is written in 1 Corinthians, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, Christ, became a life-giving spirit. Cool. Oh, this is fun. So what does genealogy tell us as I'm running over time? 1, it gives a timeline of Earth's history. It gives an explanation of what's called ethnography, where the races came from. It answers the question of racism, because we're all children of Adam equally. We're actually all children equally of Noah. The same number of generations removed from that event. Oh. Well, it gives us a lineage of Christ, gives us deeper insight into a lot of Bible stories, and gives a lot of fun pronouncing these old names. Now, why do we study this stuff? Because someone thought it was important enough to put into the Bible, and the Bible is the Word of God. Therefore, it's impinged upon us to say, okay, I don't like it, but I know it's important, and I'm going to familiarize myself at least. And the more you dig, the more gold nuggets you find. There's some fun stuff. Now, look for my book. I was hoping it to be out by the end of the year. I've seen the layout, the first 3 chapters, and I proofed them the other day. Maybe Christmas time, that was my goal, but at least January, hopefully not as late as February. This book will be out. If you signed up for our newsletter earlier, you got it. If you'd like to sign up for our magazine, here's one opportunity. I should have done this 10 minutes ago, but we're okay. Creation Magazine is out there. We've got it on the tables, and I want you to walk away with a copy. If you don't get it yet, I tell you that for me, it's been profound, encouraging me for 15 years before I came to work for CMI. I've been reading this magazine a long time. It comes out 4 times a year. If you subscribe to this magazine, you help us, you bless us. And therefore, we get to bless you in return with this fantastic family-level magazine. If you sign up for a 1-year subscription, you'll get your first copy today. If you sign up for a 2-year subscription, you'll get your first copy today, and then 2 DVDs. One's called Darwin, the Voyage That Shook the World. It's our $1 million documentary on Charles Darwin's life. Great stuff there. We just switched out the other thing. It's no longer the Fallout documentary. It's a DVD. It's titled something like, Why Would God Allow Bad Things to Happen? Theologically, it's a very important topic. We get that question a lot, and that'll come with a 2-year subscription. Here's what the form looks like. Just check off 1 year, 2 year, put your address down there, and we'll mail it to you. All right, guys, you can do that now if you're ready. Thank you. And I'm going to end up with just a couple of things. If you were expecting more science tonight, more data, not just Bible stuff, look at my Ancient DNA, Illuminating the Tapestry of Biblical Human History. This is a fun project. We filmed this in the studio, very good presentation, great illustrations. Guys worked really hard to put this together. And again, you can stream this off of our website. If you go to creation.com, click on store, you can find all our streaming stuff if you don't have a DVD player. But we have copies of this out there. I think we do have copies of this on the table. Here's Evolution's Achilles Heels, the book and the documentary. They're there for you. Don't forget about the Creation Answers book. Oh, I did this one earlier too. Yeah, more streaming stuff. The historical Adam is there. Now I'm going to end just like I ended earlier with 1 Peter 3:15, because I want you to always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that's in you, and I want you to be able to do it with gentleness and respect. But you can't do that if you don't know your stuff. You won't be confident enough about it. But you just came and listened to this nerd talk for 2 hours. You did it on purpose. Maybe you were drugged here, but hopefully you learned a few things. Hopefully you've been encouraged by a few things. Hopefully your faith is a little bit stronger. And I got materials out there to fill in the gaps for the places where I left off. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. And thank you guys for coming out tonight. And just wanted to make sure you guys knew that tomorrow we're going to have him again at 8:30 and then at 11 for both of the services talking about the alternative creation and competitive edge. We're also in the ACE hour. We're going to have him talking about dinosaurs and fossils. And then we're going to continue on at 1:30 with science of race and the biblical view of humanity. So please join us tomorrow as well, and hope to see you guys. Thank you.